Hayden, utopia or dystopia? Definition for one of those two? It's up to you. Dystopia? Okay, and you were going with dystopia for this one. So it's going to be, an extremely bad, it's like a bleak or awful depiction of society. I don't recall if you said or not, like, do we need to have a time reference for it? Well, but if you're saying 400 years from now, well, I'm not worried about the book specifically, but for a dystopia in general, it's going to be a bleak, awful depiction of society in the future. Is that word? Apocalyptic?
Yes.
It can be, yeah. So it's bleak, awful depiction of society in the future. Because of that, like, since it is going to be so horrible, a lot of times it does tend to be post-apocalyptic, where there's been some kind of horrible war or fallout that's happened. You could argue that Fahrenheit 451 is apocalyptic and isn't, because you do have that bombing that takes place at the very end when everything is destroyed, but it's not as if the setting is taking place solely, after that apocalypse. But that tends to be a part of something that's going on. So usually you'll have apocalyptic or strong government control, but it's some kind of bleak, awful depiction of society that is taking place within the future. And we don't get an exact time that's going on with Fahrenheit 451. Hayden said 400 years, and that's usually what people assume, 300-400 years in the future is what we would have going on for that one. To contrast a dystopia, what's the utopia? Zach? Okay, so it's basically a imagined, oops, I can't spell. Perfect world. So there are no issues, there are no problems. And yeah, because really such a thing as a perfect world doesn't exist, that's where you have that imagined part come through. The hope is that we as a reader kind of recognize this as being dystopia within Fahrenheit 451. Some of the people who would be around in the text, Millie, for example, might look at it as being a perfect world until you have the whole fallout that would be happening with part 3. But certainly these two things are going to contrast one another. Perfect world with utopia, bleak, awful depiction that we'd have going on with dystopia. Any of these characters, going Guy through Faber, what would be some details that we know about them? Jason, let's pick one. Any one that you want. What would be some things that we know about them? Who? Okay, so Montauk's firefighter. Well, yeah, fireman, because he's going to be one who's going to be starting fires as opposed to fighting them. Fireman. What else do we know about him? What else do we know about Guy? Main character, protagonist. What else? He saw value in books. Okay, so value, appreciate books. Nick? Okay, how do you classify that marriage? Like happy. Okay, yeah, I think indifferent would be a pretty good term. Distant would be a way to describe it. I know we don't have the room to necessarily write all this stuff. First line of the book, we mentioned at one point. Anyone recall? Very first line. It was a pleasure to burn. And so that is the viewpoint that Guy would have about a pleasure to burn. So initially, when he is a fireman, that is something that he likes. However, we start to have turning points where now there's that value, that's appreciation when it comes to books. If we were to say there's one character that strongly influences Guy in that change in beliefs, who's that one character going to be? Ben, who do you think? Who's going to be probably a character that best influences Guy to change his viewpoint to go from like liking his job as a fireman to appreciating books. Yeah, it's like Clarice is the one that kind of gets him to kind of start to initiate those kind of questions.
Also argue that Margaret too.
Yeah, and I'd say one without the other probably doesn't do it, but that both of those would be characters. I would absolutely agree. All right, Millie, we already kind of talked about in the sense that she is married to Guy. What are things that we know about Millie beyond just simply being married to Guy? Austin, what's like one detail about Millie? Okay. Limited communication. She's certainly taking a look at technology a little bit more. Okay, she does love her family, and by family we're going TV family. So she is certainly all about the TV walls. And then what would be another piece of technology that we would associate with her beyond the seashells, so like the earbud seashells. So TV walls and seashells would be items that we would probably associate with her. What's our first introduction to her? What would be the conflict that she would be dealing with? Okay, so we have the sleeping pill overdose. And based on the people who come to kind of help her out, this seems to be a fairly common occurrence that would be happening, as there'd be 9 or 10 of them are going to be going on. What do they not remember about each other? Don't remember where they met. Remember where they met? Chicago. Ends up being at the very end. Remember that Chicago is where they ended up meeting. All right. So Clarice, we already talked about so far as has a influence on Guy. Anyone recall how old she is? She's 17-year-old. What is going to make her so unusual compared to other people, whether it be her age group or adults? Okay. And then I'm just going to put like visit, nature. She certainly seems to appreciate those things that other people would not, a little bit more organic. We know her family has come from Chicago. What do we know about Beatty and fire departments and her family? They're kind of like, on the radar of the firemen. They know at least about them, so there's been some curiosity before. Tyler, what ultimately happens to Clarice? You remember her reason? So she dies from, reckless drivers. And it's not that she is the one driving, but that she would be hit from someone who had reckless driving that was taking place, which is one of her complaints about, people of her age, of that generation in general. Captain Beatty, we know that he's going to be the captain of the fire department, but what would be some other things? Bill, what's like one thing you got for Beatty on your sheet besides captain of the department? Okay, so he enforces book banning and burning. We said, remember, with his name that he is someone who, quote unquote, baits Montauk or tries to like trick him into different things. And so when you have that death scene taking place at the end, Guy has a little bit of that recognition that thinks that Beatty actually wants to die, so seems to kind of secretly value and appreciate books. We certainly know that he, knows a lot about them because of the amount that he's able to quote from books over and over and over again. How does he ultimately die? Montauk gets him with the flamethrower, so yes, essentially tortures him after he has to burn down his house at the beginning of part 3. Faber, previous career, old English professor, so retired English professor. Zach, what's the device that he comes up with? So he develops the radio transmitter. Hayden, do you remember what city he's going to go to at the end? Yeah. Since you mentioned Chicago earlier, I didn't know if you remember this city too. At the very end, Faber is going to go somewhere to continue to help the publishing books. It's fairly close to Chicago. State. It's in Missouri. Leaves for St. Louis. What's Faber ultimately going to do, or what's the goal ultimately for the plan? He is going to help Guy do what for books? We're not going to write them, we're not going to create them, but he is going to, by doing what? What do you have to do in order to bring back a book? Like if we got a physical copy of it, it has been that's Granger. But Faber's going to help bring these back in the sense that if we got a physical copy of it, it has been, begins with a P, published and printed. Yeah, printed, publishing. So he's going to help with the printing, publishing. And I mentioned to you, Faber is a name. There used to be Faber, an old publisher. So he's all for printing books. Now, when it comes to Granger down here towards the end, he is the one who is kind of the leader of the, quote unquote resistance people. And what they do is they memorize the books. Remember the difference, with Granger, when Guy first shows up, there's fire going on, but the fire is a different type where it's not something that is going to be destroying, but it's something that is going to be more warming, it's going to be helping people out. Okay? Granger, what does he want to build? Wants to build a mirror factory. So once things get redone, he's going to come back and help build a mirror factory. So the idea that if you see screens, you're going to be seeing yourself. You're going to have to look at yourself in the mirror. You're not going to be taking a look at screens for other things. All right. For down here at the bottom of the first page, what are details that we know about the firemen, whether how they're presented in the book or like historically? What's some of the information that we know, quote unquote, know about them? Who's the first fireman historically mentioned, at least within the book? Okay, so Benjamin Franklin.
He was a fireman?
And keep in mind, this part is historically accurate that he is a fireman because he does start the first volunteer fire company that would be happening within the United States. But we know that we start to get some issues taking place because according to the book, the year that the fire departments get started is in 1790. And what is the reason for the fire departments in 1790? They are going to burn whose books? They're going to burn books from the British so that there is an elimination of British influence. But we know that this is where some details are now going to be shifted because by 1790 it's an independent country with the United States and you no longer have the British colonists going on. But the idea is to eliminate British influence. So this would be an example where like history or facts have been changed. Okay, so Ben Franklin, 1790, eliminate British influence through books. We know at this point we got a change in history when Beatty is kind of running through all these things. Hannah, what's something we know about firemen's equipment, uniforms, anything along those lines? Okay. So they kind of have like two emblems. One of them is going to be the salamander, and the other one ends up being the phoenix. What is the myth about salamanders as to why that's going to be on there? I think you told us about last time. So they're born from fire, and it's something that is believed that's not going to harm them, which is certainly going to match up with the way that firemen are portrayed throughout the book. So in a lot of ways, the firemen kind of end up being a salamander themselves. What also ends up getting the name of salamander in the book? The fire truck. Remember the other name that goes with it too? Dragon gets mentioned. So both of those are options for the fire truck. So you have a fire truck that gets referred to as dragon, as well as getting the salamander. Phoenix, we know that this is a bird, that ultimately gets burned, but then comes back from the ashes. Why would the firefighters kind of be compared to salamanders when it comes to their equipment? We know things that they have are certainly fireproof coats or fireproof jackets, so when they are in a building burning it down, it's not something that is ultimately going to harm them. We already kind of mentioned this with Beatty, but compared to having a fire or a water hose, they have fire hose, flamethrower, as opposed to water. What's on their helmets? Specifically, which number? 451. So 451 is on the helmets. Jason, why 451? Remember what happens with that temperature? It's not boiling. Temperature at which paper burns. I think 212 is boiling for Fahrenheit. All right, so things for Clarice. Nick, what would be one thing that displeases Clarice about society? Try to get a little more specific. Okay. So, society is too violent. And that could be something that is purposeful, where people are killing each other. That could be something that is fairly accidental when it comes to the driving. She's upset about how reckless people drive, which ends up being a little bit of irony, since that's what causes her demise at the end. What is something that she does like to do outside of walking and talking? But she gives an example when she's complaining about school. But there's one thing that she does like to do with the subway. She likes to listen to people talk. So she likes to listen to people kind of talking on subway. So the aspect that certainly displeases her is going to be that over lack of communication. And the assumption would be, if she is displeased with the lack of communication, she's probably also displeased with the amount of technology that is getting focused on throughout. Identify 2 moments in the novel that permanently affect Guy. We've already mentioned both of these. And I think, Ethan, you mentioned one. Want to take a guess which? Okay. So, and it would be death with both. So we have the death of Clarice, and then the death of the woman in her own house. And certainly with her, we put the term martyr to go along, where she's willing to die for her beliefs. At that point, remember, this is when she's quoting Ridley and whatnot, talking about, here is where we're going to kind of like start the revolt, start the blaze. Things are going to kind of happen with us. So you have the death of the woman, death of Clarice. We also kind of made a connection that this has the Statue of Liberty kind of illusion that would be going with the woman as well, where she's holding book as well as the fire. Katie, what's one of the symbols you have? And there's different things that we could certainly go with. I'm not looking for a specific one.
That fire symbolizes like destruction.
Okay.
In the story, like, that's their only way of how they perceive it.
So, yep, fire symbolizes destruction. It does kind of symbolize life a little bit towards the end when it has a warming effect,
Yeah,
but
that's
yep,
not, yeah.
certainly would symbolize destruction. Madison, another symbol.
It's like a TV hunt because it shows how society wants everyone engaged in this brainwashing.
Okay, so TV, home, I'm going to put walls / family, all of those things. But you have the brainwashing of society. Okay, in front of Granger and the rest. So Montauk, kind of quote unquote leading the way. How's Montauk get out of the city? Max, you mind shutting the door? He runs and he has that, where Faber gives him old clothes, gives him alcohol to kind of mask the smell. Thank you. So he runs, and then to get where Granger is, there's one other kind of mode of transportation that he kind of uses. I'm sorry? No. I'm thinking like once he's outside of the city. Uses the river, okay? So the river, and Katie, I'm kind of thinking what you were saying. We mentioned fire symbolizing destruction. When we have the river, we also have water. So river, water, this can kind of be a new life or a cleansing because he is getting away from everything that was going on within the city. Other symbols, not that we got to go into a whole lot of detail with it, but physically, what would be an object that is certainly going to be symbolic that people would hold? I'm thinking exactly this. Martyr, faith. Bible would be an example. Books. We already mentioned the number with 451. You could have symbolism also with the mechanical hound, where you kind of have this new kind of technology that is taking place. All of those things would certainly be able to take a look at. All right? So a variety of symbols here that would be going on. According to Faber and Montauk, fire plus water equals wine. Remember, fire plus water equals wine, where something new is going to be happening.
I asked my chemistry teacher if that's true.
I'm guessing they said no.
No, he said, "What the hell are they teaching you in that class?"
I doubt that's the way that he worded it.
No, that's what he said.
That'd be Mr. Ebert? Yeah, I got my doubts. 4 differences between families in today's society as presented in Fahrenheit 451. What would be some differences? Max, focus on here. The women that Clarice has over to watch TV in part 2. They talk about their kids. What are thoughts about kids and husbands? So families are separated, and this seems like a little detail, but kind of going along with it, where they end up for childbirth, they end up saying that they do cesarean sections, C-sections all the time because it's just easier. It's more where the kid comes out, and then you have the surgery, things are done, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. So you certainly have families being separated. We know that for the most part, we already kind of mentioned that there's that lack of communication that is happening. When it comes to school with families, school starts at, what are they doing for ages? Every year it gets younger and younger and younger. So rather than being like 6 years old, then it's 5 years old, then it's 4 years old, then it's 3 years old. So you have younger and younger ages that this is starting at. So school starts at younger ages. So the idea that, again, you have families being separated, You have the kids that are going off in their own direction with school was certainly going to be a drastic difference that we would have. People do not, for the most part, do what that Clarice's family will do. And I'm thinking front porch with the house, talk to each other, sitting outside. Okay. Visit, sit outside, things of those lines. What else? Hayden, what do you have for like a fourth one? Bottom of the second page. So lack of memory. And if there's lack of memory about where they've been married or little details, it's probably overall lack of love, compassion, caring, all of those kinds of things. Prior to taking Guy to his house, 3 ways in which the reader suspects that Captain Beatty knows that Guy would possess books. So we'd be looking for what would be examples of foreshadowing at this point that we think he probably has books. Kind of has like that itch for books. So Beatty visits Guy and talks about the itch for books, something that every firefighter goes through. That's definitely going to be one way. Ben? Okay, so refusing to burn books, woman, all those things. Gia, another one? Mm-hmm. Kind of like his story that he's doing with the Once Upon a Time. Beatty also talks about a dream that he has right before he ends up taking him to the house, where they were debating back and forth. And then what would be another physical object that really drives Guy crazy, that is bothering him from really the very beginning of part 1, about 15 pages in, when he goes to work? The hound. So the hound is always responding to him. The hound is scratching at the door when him and Billy are going through books after Beatty is there. So there seems to be some kind of suspicion with the hound that it has maybe been programmed for him at this point. Faber gives him these 3 things that are needed for literature to impact society. First one, Madison. So we got the quality of information, talks about the literature has to have pores. So you have to have information. What do you need in order to digest that information? You need time, leisure. So time, leisure to read, digest. Quality, time, and the last thing, the freedom or the right to act, with those first 2. Understanding our own understanding. What would be some criticisms Bradbury would have of Fahrenheit 451, and probably also our own world that we would be living in? General things. Like, Bill, what would be one criticism? Alright, TVs, technology being the center of, like, basically life, entertainment, all of that stuff.
The lack of understanding literature.
Lack of understanding, lack of empathy for literature, lack of trying to, like, even, attempt to read it.
Yeah.
Too much violence, and that could be purposeful violence, that can also be accidental violence that would be going on. Lack of communication. Another big thing also, and that could be speaking, as well as literature, And also with the changing in history, what you have taking place is a censorship idea concept that would be occurring. So there's that desire not to read, but there's also when information is being disseminated, that it is being altered. So, run through study guides.